Okay, we are on. Hey everyone, we're gonna wait just a minute for a couple people to hop on here and see that we're live. Thanks for joining us. Here with Dr. Karen in her office, and we're gonna chat about some really relevant things in a minute, but just gonna let some people view this real quick. So, yeah. So, let's see. So unofficially, thanks for doing this. You said you're providing this information for like several churches and
Yes, there's been a very large amount of people interested in hearing about how can we help kids understand more about what is going on, how do we talk at a developmentally appropriate level, and how can we best help parents handle confinement and quarantine.
yes. Anybody need to know about that? Me, both
Yes,
hands.
all of us.
Okay, I see my husband's on here. Hello. Okay, let's see. It's officially 3:30, so we're gonna go ahead and get started as people continue to come on here. So I am here with Dr. Karen Hutcheson, a friend of mine. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, and anything else you want to fill in there with that title and just tell people what you do.
So I'm Dr. Karen. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I provide mental health care here in Louisville for children, families, and teenagers. I am the owner of a private practice called the Center for Family Connections.
Yes, I knew you'd do that well, so I just passed it off to you. So we asked Dr. Karen to meet with us today. As Iron Bell Ministries, we've talked about just wanting to be able to practically equip people for different areas of things going on right now in the midst of quarantine and being at home and the virus. And so I asked her to specifically speak into how we can be talking to our children about the coronavirus. I told her jokingly that my attempt was not a good one. I have a 7-year-old. I did my best effort, and afterwards I said, how are you feeling? Are you okay? And he said, I'm scared. And I said, what are you scared of? He's like, I don't know. I was like, okay, that was a parent fail. So I am here to also soak in for my own home. So I'm just going to let her talk a little bit about this subject, and then I'm going to ask her a few more questions. And then for those of you that are on, we are going to let you ask some questions at the end before we kind of wrap up the live stream. So Go ahead.
Okay, so a couple things to start with. One of the biggest things that we want to remember is we need to talk to our children. We have to talk about these things. All too often, especially in our culture as Christians, we have grown up and we've been taught to just kind of say everything's fine, to act like things are fine, especially on Wednesdays and Sunday nights. And so this is very different. We have to talk about what's going on. Our children need to hear, and they need to learn, and they need to hear and learn specifically from their parents or caregivers. And so first and foremost, we have to talk about what's going on. It's going to be very important that your children learn about the coronavirus from you, especially when we're talking about little kids. Middle school and teenagers, we still want them to hear the main information from you, but each family gets to decide what type of access their teenagers have to the news or social media where they might hear more about the coronavirus. So that being said, we want to make sure that our kids are learning and hearing directly from us. So we want parents to be the ones that are consuming the information from the news, from reputable news outlets. So I would strongly encourage parents, this is what I've been saying for a couple of days now, this is impacting everyone, and it's impacting everyone in different ways, but most of us have a heightened level of nervousness, a heightened level of stress. So I would encourage you to create some type of plan within your family with parents or caregivers, whether that's checking in the morning once, checking in the evening another time, checking in 2 times or 3 times a day, but making sure that you're only checking in a couple of times a day. We don't want to get into a pattern where we're constantly scrolling and we're constantly checking our phones, because that can be even more overwhelming. And when we're overwhelmed, then guess what? Our children who are in our home, our teenagers who are in our home, they're seeing that, and they're watching mom or mom and dad become nervous and become worried. And again, it's not that we want to hide our emotions. We want our kids to know that we are in control. We want our kids to know that we are able to take care of them, and that we can provide them a safe and loving and nurturing home environment, even amidst a really scary situation. So, backtrack. We want to be the ones that are consuming the news, and we want to be the ones that are sharing the news with our children. We want to make sure that we're providing developmentally appropriate information. And again, you know your child and teenager better than I do, and better than Jenny does. And so you guys that are living in your home, you get to decide what's developmentally appropriate for each of your children. I would strongly discourage you from using specific numbers. Don't talk about specifically how many people have passed away due to the virus. We want to just focus on developmentally appropriate information. We want to strongly encourage children to ask any questions that they might have. Most children are incredibly curious. Their brains just run 90 to nothing. And they have a lot of questions, but sometimes they're not sure if their questions are good or if it's okay to ask questions, especially if mom has seemed stressed or if dad has seemed stressed, if mom's been a little bit more distant, or if mom and dad have been on their phones more. If they can tell that mom and dad are worried, they may feel like it's not okay to approach and ask questions. So we want to strongly encourage and recommend and remind our children that they can ask any question. That's ultimately one of the best parenting goals and strategies that we can have, is we want to be a safe space for children where they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can come and ask us anything. And so repeat to your child or teenager that you can ask me anything you want. What questions do you have? Let's think about some questions related to what's going on and why we have to stay in our homes and why we're not going to school right now, or why is it called the coronavirus? What does that even mean? What's a virus? And so encourage your children to ask any and all questions. Now, sometimes what happens, and a lot of parents are like, well, Dr. Karen, they won't stop asking questions. And so what you can do with this, in the same way that I'm encouraging you all to limit your own consumption of what's going on, you can help kiddos by knowing.
Someone gave a thumbs up.
You can help kiddos be encouraged to ask questions by answering questions in the morning and answering questions at night, or maybe you answer questions after lunch and then answer questions before dinner. I would not encourage you to have these conversations right before your child is getting ready to go to bed. We don't want to interrupt nighttime routines and rhythms. But what you can do when they might approach you with a question outside of one of those times is we want to hear and see our children. We want them to feel seen and heard, and so we acknowledge that question and we say, you know what, Caleb, that is a phenomenal question. I love that question. Would you go add that to our list of questions about the coronavirus? And Mama will answer those right after lunch. I love that question, though. Thank you for coming and asking that. That's so creative, and what a great question that was. Or you can say, you know what, Caleb, I love that question. Could you draw me a picture of that? Would you go draw Mama a picture of that question? And so in that, it's twofold. My child is being seen and my child is being heard. They have my attention. I'm seeing and hearing them. But I'm also giving that child an opportunity to utilize a play activity, even in coloring and drawing, where they're using their brains to try and get some of this stuff out. Children learn through play. Children express themselves through play. And so we want to give children multiple opportunities to get some of this stuff out. Like, what I mean by getting stuff out is getting their thoughts, getting their emotions out, and oftentimes through art, through play, through dance, through music, children are able to do those things. And so we want to provide lots of specific opportunities to do that. And you don't have to do that in an office like this during a play therapy session. Even parents can introduce that and provide that. So again, we want to provide a foundation where our kids know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can come and ask us any question that they have about this situation. Does that mean you have to be constantly answering questions? Not at all. It means that you want to set up whatever works best for your family 1 to 2 times a day when you're going to talk and provide answers to those questions. Another thing that's going to be helpful for you all to understand is that, guess what? I don't know all of the answers to the questions. I'm guessing Jenny doesn't know all the answers to the questions either. But one thing that we can do is model transparency and authenticity for our children. That's so, so important for healthy relationships. And so we get to say, Caleb, Mama doesn't know that answer. I do not know the answer to that. But what I can do is I can try and look for that answer, or it may be something that we just don't know right now. And sometimes when we don't know questions, that makes our bellies hurt a little bit, or it makes me a little sweaty, makes us a little nervous, a little worried. And so in that situation that I just described, I'm identifying what I'm thinking and I'm feeling. We name to tame. We identify so that we can regulate. If I am naming what I'm feeling and thinking, then I'm going to help that child to regulate what they're thinking and feeling. Essentially, if we think neurobiologically, we're moving right side of the brain of emotions, fear-based things, uncertainty. We're moving that to left side of the brain of language and literal. We want to help our kids tell that story. We want that narrative to happen, where I'm really worried about this question. Mama says that she doesn't know the answer, and that makes my belly hurt, and I'm really nervous. And so does that mean that everyone's going to die? No, we're moving that over to language logic. I know that mom is going to look up that answer, and I know that mom can keep me safe and that dad can keep me safe. And we want to reassure our children the facts that we do know right now. The facts that we know is that children are really less likely to get this virus. We know that we can empower our children and help them to understand the things that they can do. Children love to be empowered. Giving a child a task is a wonderful way to empower a child, to help them when they're feeling nervous or when they're feeling worried, or if they're having any type of even social difficulties. Giving a child a task, empowering them is super, super helpful. And so we want to help our kids to remember ways that they can keep themselves safe. And so that's why we wash our hands all the time. We wash our hands for 20 to 30 seconds with very warm water, with lots of really good soap. We sing lots of songs while we're washing our hands, so we know how long we need to wash our hands. If we have to cough, we want to make sure that we're coughing into our elbows. Biggest thing that's super hard for kids is keeping their hands all up off of their face and everywhere else, and all up off of yours. And so you can engage in some replacement behaviors of just practicing, like keeping our hands in our pockets. We can sit on our hands if we need to, and all of those things can be practiced. But probably your kids are going to be putting their hands all up in their face a lot. That just means we get to practice washing our hands. And so in instances of big fear moments, we want to reassure our children. We want to reassure them the facts that we do know, which again, kids are not as likely to get this right now. That's what we do know. We want to reassure. We want to focus on facts, and we want to empower them to know what they can do to keep themselves safe.
That was amazing. And a list for questions. Like, I love that. I'm totally implementing that today. Thank you.
Yep.
A very
You
inquisitive
can even
child.
get a special journal. If you don't want to go to the store and you don't have random journals at your house, you can just staple some papers together. If you're saying, but I don't have a stapler, you can just poke some holes with a screwdriver, get some string, make a little journal or a little notebook, and that's their coronavirus question journal. It's fun.
I love it.
Kids love activities.
Okay, so I am going to put you on the spot a little bit, because I know you have your list and I want you to roll with that. But if I'm a parent on Facebook Live, I don't think that I know exactly what is age-appropriate information. So if you're talking about like an elementary student, what would you consider to be age-appropriate information?
Yeah,
Let's
like
just start with that.
developmentally appropriate information. So we want to just make it pretty simple. We want to kind of reduce our words. We don't want to talk a lot. Most parents, that's what we do. We talk a whole bunch. And our kids usually stop listening after a couple of words. And so for like grade school age children, we just want to say a couple little words of there's this virus that's going around the world right now. And the virus is pretty dangerous. And it's really dangerous for people that they're already sick, or if they're a little bit older, like kind of older than your grandparents. And so because of that, we're staying inside. And because of that, we're washing our hands more. And because of that, we're not going to school right now. So just keep it as brief and short as possible.
And that is why I failed.
And in that, you can encourage and make sure we're encouraging questions. And if you don't want to answer a question, or you feel like the answer to that question would be developmentally inappropriate, then we just circle back to the facts that we know. Circle back to, you know what, sweetie? I am not for sure about that answer, but Mama's going to look into that. But what I want you to remember is that right now, kids aren't really getting this. Kids are not at as big of a risk as older people or people that are already sick.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess my next question is, and if I don't think that this is the norm, but if your child is maybe not asking about the coronavirus, like I'm guessing based on your earlier statement, we should still
Yes.
educate and we should still share
Definitely.
in
Yes.
an age appropriate sense.
Yes. You need to talk to your kids and tell them why they're not in school. You need to talk to your kids and tell them why mom is working from home or dad is working from home. And in that, again, even if they're not asking questions, we need to provide developmentally appropriate facts. And in that, we're modeling talking to our kids about difficult situations. And that just has to happen, because what happens is if we don't, then our kids do this really cool thing, and I like to call it like the Swiss cheese situation, where if you imagine a piece of Swiss cheese with lots of little holes, if we don't talk to our kids and we don't provide factual, developmentally appropriate information, then what they do, because they're super creative in the way that their brains are, they create a filler for that Swiss cheese hole, and it's usually the most exaggerated and scary situation. They create really scary situations that aren't accurate. And so we want to provide developmentally appropriate factual information. And we want to focus on the facts, and we want to focus on ways that they can help themselves to stay safe. It's that empowering piece again, and that reassurance.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I know from personal experience, and we talked about this briefly before going on here today, that families at home, that is a struggle for a lot of people
Yes.
right now. There's a lot of anxiety for all ages. There's a lot of, I don't know how to do this. This is new. Kids are experiencing being out of their routine.
Yep.
There's a lot of uncertainty. So what are some helpful things you can kind of say to speak into that?
Sure. So one of the number one recommendations that I have, and that other mental health professionals and physicians and medical professionals are all in agreement in, is that we need to, as much as possible, stick to a rhythm, stick to a routine. Very specifically, it can be easy because our whole families are home and our kids are home, and we want to stay up late and we want to watch lots of movies and sleep in. But I would strongly encourage you to go to bed at the same time and to wake up at the same time. Keep that regular structure and routine. That's going to help our kids' bodies, and it's going to help our kids' brains to be well rested and to buffer some of the additional stressors that are happening in our community. We want to make sure that we're helping our kids to stay active. All of extracurriculars aren't happening, and extracurriculars are wonderful for kids' bodies. They're also phenomenal for kids' brains. And what I mean by that is it helps our kids to regulate their emotions. It helps our kids to get some of these big things out of their brains and out of their bodies. And so we want to keep our kids active. We want to find creative ways within our homes to make sure that our kids are moving their bodies and getting at least 20 minutes of body movement a day. Clinically speaking, I would strongly recommend every 2 hours that your child is moving their body. That's super helpful, especially if your child has any type of brain differences. Brain differences means that we just kind of have differences in the way that we think about things, the way that we feel. Maybe our emotions are a little bit bigger. Maybe our children have been even provided with some initials or letters behind their names, like the old ADHD or things like that, executive functioning deficits. We got to keep our kids' brains occupied and their bodies moving. That doesn't mean that you have to micromanage and schedule every single aspect of their day, but I would strongly recommend some type of basic schedule. Within that, as parents, we also have to have a ton of flexibility of knowing that it's very unlikely we're going to stick to that schedule, but that schedule is there and that our kids can know what to expect. When a child knows what to expect, oftentimes ambiguity is lessened and we have a lower amount of nervousness and worry and stress. In that, again, as parents, we've got to be super flexible. We've got to understand that we're not going to stick to that as much as maybe we thought we were going to stick to it. But I would strongly recommend, again, keeping structure, routine, especially related to when we go to sleep, when we wake up, having regular meal times, having structured meal times, not just kind of snacking all throughout the day. We want healthy nutrition. There's several areas that we know that buffer against chronic stress, that buffer against traumatic situations, and that's going to be good, healthy sleep. We just talked about that. It's going to be good, healthy nutrition. It's going to be keeping our kids hydrated. We definitely want them drinking water. We want them staying hydrated. as much as possible, we need them moving their bodies. That's exercise. And then we want them having moments of being able to quiet down and calm down. Science and research calls that meditation. Some of you guys get a little freaked out by that word, but it simply means quieting our brain. Do we have moments where our kids can learn to be still and quiet their brains?
That's good. Do you want to keep rolling?
That's basically what I have.
Okay. You also mentioned earlier that it's important that, which we can be really bad at this, that parents are taking care of themselves.
Oh yes, that's a very good point too. So in all of this, anytime that you are talking with your kids about the coronavirus, it's very, very, very important that you have in some healthy way managed your own stress and anxiety. If you know that you're feeling a lot of stress and anxiety, don't go talk to your children during that moment. Our kids are referencing us, and that's a wonderful, beautiful thing, that our children look to us for reassurance. They look to us to model how to have healthy emotions and how to regulate our emotions. And so we want to make sure that we are, as much as possible, regulated and teaching and modeling how to handle stress, nervousness, worry, ambiguity. That doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. No one's going to be perfect in any of this ever, but we want to try and model in as healthy as possible ways so that our kiddos are seeing us and seeing that we are taking good care of ourselves and that we're practicing the ways that we're talking to them about how to keep themselves safe. So if we're telling our kids left and right to keep your hands off your face or to wash your hands, but they're not seeing us do any of that, that's probably not going to go very far. So we want to make sure that our words are also matching our actions and that our actions are matching the words that we're teaching our children.
Okay. So I feel like that was some good, just kind of basic information for us. And I want to just encourage you guys to, we did have a prayer and worship time this morning at the Iron Bell where we kind of spent some time praying for you all. So that's on our page from earlier this morning. And one of the things the Lord was really highlighting for us as parents especially is just to receive His grace to be able to do this. There's a lot of people that are experiencing a major disruption in their finances and their jobs, even just basic things as far as where to get food. We are all adjusting. And one of the most important things I make sure that I do with my son, if I have a moment or if he sees, me responding in a way that isn't how I want him to, I go and I tell him, hey, mommy was frustrated. Like, there's some tough things going on, and sometimes I get sad, and sometimes I get a little scared. And when I feel that way, I ask Jesus to help me with that, and then I ask him, how that makes him feel and make sure we're okay. And he knows kind of the root of what's going on and how I'm processing that as far as, appropriately, and just acknowledging I'm having a tough moment or whatever. He's learning from me, hopefully, how to do that well. So anyway, I just want to open up a couple minutes for a couple questions. If you guys just want to type in the comments, then I can kind of funnel those to Dr. Karen. So I'm going to move a little closer.
Sure.
A little closer here.
5 comments. Okay.
Okay. What age should we talk to our kids? Maybe that's like, I guess they're wondering, is too young is what I'm interpreting maybe.
I would say if your kids are walking and talking, then we probably need to be talking a little bit about why mom and dad are home, especially if you've had some changes in the environment of someone coming home and working.
Okay, here's one. What's a practical way that we can encourage our kids to quiet their minds or meditate, if we're comfortable using that word?
Oh, I love it. Nice. I love it. Well, there's wonderful apps available online. One of my favorites is Headspace. There's some additional ways that we can help kids to learn to be mindful. There's great resources online. And also you can just practice with them. One of the easiest ways to do it is to just sit down with your child and just tell them that we're going to take some really big deep breaths together and just practice deep breathing. So when we breathe, we want to breathe in for 4 seconds, we want to hold it for 2, and we want to breathe out for 4. There's also some fun and creative ways that you can do this. I don't know if like any of you happen to have like a stockpile of pinwheels at your house, but pinwheels is a lot of fun to do too, where you take a really big deep breath in, you hold it, and then you blow the pinwheel. If you have balloons, you can do the same thing with trying to blow up a balloon, of just practicing breathing in, holding it, and breathing out. It's really hard to quiet your brain. Most adults have a really hard time with it. I tell people all the time in my office, I think it's been harder for me to learn to meditate and quiet my brain for 20 minutes than it was to run a marathon. And so it can be really, really hard. So start slow. Maybe try and just be still and quiet for 15 seconds with little kiddos, like 2nd grade and under. Maybe try for a minute or 2 minutes with grade school kids. See if your teenagers can try and be still and quiet for a couple of minutes, 4 or 5 minutes. And in that, we're teaching, as our kids are getting older, we're teaching them that it is quieting our brain, but it's also really trying to focus on something that's peaceful. And for those of us who have a faith affiliation, we can focus on an image that reminds us of peace and comfort in the Lord. We can focus on a favorite verse. We can focus on truths that we know from the gospel. But you don't have to simply try and quiet your brain. That is not, well, I'll just stop there.
Okay, what are some resources for talking about, quote, big feelings? Many are not used to talking through emotions.
Yes, and is this resources for parents or children, or both? Well, I'll just answer that because you're not the one asking the question. So, mainly what I would encourage you to do, especially since like we're not getting out much, not to, but start with like a picture that you saw of a happy face, a sad face, and a nervous face. You can do that too. I usually just draw 2 lines for eyeballs and then a little curvy mouth. And we name those, and you can write the emotion under it. And you can practice teaching your kids, this is happy, this is sad, this is angry, this is nervous. And you may think, well, that's kind of silly, everyone does that, but really we don't. Most people don't. And so we say that, we teach it, and then we model it, and we give lots of examples of when I have been happy, when I have been sad, when I have been angry, when I'm feeling nervous. You can do that throughout the day. The biggest thing to remember in our kids is that nothing that we've talked about today can be a one and done conversation. It has to be a conversation that we are having. An hour every day at 5 o'clock? No, that's not what I'm saying. But it means that we're creating a space, a foundation, an environment where our kids know that they can come and talk to us about anything, and that we're revisiting these topics. And so the way that we teach about big emotions is we have to learn what that means. We have to be able to identify so that we can regulate. If I don't know what I'm feeling, then I'm definitely not going to be aware of what I'm thinking. And I'm not going to be aware of how to regulate that or what skill or coping strategy to use when I'm actually jealous that my brother gets to play with the Legos. I wanted to play with the Legos, but instead my body is really angry and I'm body slamming him. I was jealous, not angry. And so we have to teach our kids how to cope and manage specific emotions.
Body slamming over Legos.
I mean, it's just a hypothetical. I happen to have 2 little boys, and maybe that's happened before.
Okay, any other questions you guys have? We're going to wrap up here in a couple minutes, but I just want to allow for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Just to have them. Okay. Okay. My sister, she has amazing questions.
Okay, so it's not. It looks like Jessica's asking some great questions, but I don't see a lot of others rolling in. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. And I would love for both of us just quickly to kind of just pray for all the parents on here and just bless them.
Sure.
So, Lord, we just thank you we do just kind of reiterate what you were highlighting this morning. Thank you for grace. Thank you for the gift that you give us to navigate situations and circumstances we've never had to navigate before. Thank you that we have your Holy Spirit as our helper to look to you and to receive what we need in the day-to-day moments. Thank you that you are there to provide emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, the things that we're needing for ourselves, the things that we are trying to provide for our kids. And so I just ask that you would counsel and guide just every parent that's on this live stream, that you would just reveal your presence to them, and that you would give them wisdom and discernment in knowing how to, what tools to give their kids, and when their kids need to play, and when their kids need to rest, and when their kids need schoolwork, when their kids need a break. And just ask that you would be in our homes and that you would dwell amongst us. That is a real thing. And so we just ask you, Holy Spirit, to do that. And we receive grace today for the days ahead. Thank you for the advice given today. And we just ask that we would take these tools and implement them well.
God, we pray that you would help parents and caregivers and families and children to feel at peace and to know that you are Lord. Pray specifically for parents that we would all have a supernatural peace and understanding that we can get through this. I pray that we would have an awareness of, amidst all of this, that there is a sweetness, there is a beauty of an opportunity that we may never ever have again in our lives, to spend this much time with our children. And even though that's hectic and stressful at times, I pray for intentionality and awareness, and that we would use this time as much as possible to grow healthy connections with our children, to intentionally pour into the relationships that are so very important between parents and children and parents and teenagers. We thank you, and we love you. Amen.
Before I hop off, I'm seeing on your page Pinterest ideas for occupying time.
Yes, just as I'm talking through like structuring our days with kids, it's going to be important that you provide them with ideas of how they can use their time. Unfortunately, with this generation, our kids have lost the ability to know what it feels like to be bored. And so it's going to be a really nice idea for you guys to come up with and literally write out, and you can get super creative with it. But to literally have ideas for how your kids can spend their time, to have very specific ways, specific to your own home, of how they can spend their time.
Okay, that's good. All right, thanks you guys for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
so much for hopping on here, and
Have a good day.